introduce Edwin. His title of this speech will be called The Art of Insinuation. It's one of his advanced speeches, and we look forward to hearing him talk.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. You cannot pass through life without having one time or another trying to persuade people or to ask them of something. Can you do this for me? Tell me. You gotta help me. Buy this from me? You have to believe that I'm right. It's me. It's me, me, me. We all do this. And everybody does the same thing to us. Your boss does it to you, your spouse, heck, even strangers on the street passing out flyers. They want something from us. Now, when we want something, most of us are accustomed to taking the direct approach. We ask. We demand. We say exactly what we want. While that may seem efficient and our being honest may make us feel good about ourselves, we all know that this approach seldom works. People have their own set of ideas, so why should they listen to you? And if you keep pressing, they're only going to get defensive or even resent you for trying to persuade them. Consider instead the power of insinuation. What is insinuation? To insinuate, according to the dictionary, is to convey an idea through indirect or subtle means. How does one insinuate? There's a person from history who was known for doing this. Back in 18th century France, a strange man walked into the court of Louis XV. Nobody knew anything about this man. His age and his accent were unplaceable. He called himself Count Saint-Germain, whatever that meant. And from the way he was dressed, he was obviously very wealthy and very from the upper class. And he was also very cultured. He played the violin, and he also painted magnificently. But the most intoxicating thing about him was his conversation. In truth, the Count was the greatest phony of the 18th century. He was a master at the art of insinuation. Whenever he spoke, a word here or there would slip out, a vague reference to the philosopher's stone, which turned crude metal into gold, or to the elixir of life. He wouldn't say he possessed these items, but he made you associate their powers with him. Now, had he simply claimed that he had them, no one would have believed him, and everyone would have just walked away. One time, the Count referred to a man who had died 40 years earlier as if he had known him personally. Now, if that were the case, the Count would have had to be in his 80s, although he looked to be more in his 40s. Now, he did mention the elixir of life, and he does seem so young. It makes you think. People couldn't help but draw that connection. The key to the Count's words was vagueness. He always dropped his hints into a lively conversation. He sowed a seductive idea that engaged his target's imaginations, but was quickly forgotten. It was too subtle to be remembered at the time, and only later did his subjects reflect on what he had just talked about. And after a while, the idea would take root and grow in their minds, seeming to have emerged naturally as if from their own minds. And later on, people started coming back to the Count, inquiring about the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, completely unaware that it was he who planted the idea in their minds in the first place. This is insinuation in its classic form. Subtle, undetectable, and leaving your targets utterly clueless as to where the idea came from. Insinuation can also be blatant. There's another story I want to share with you about a young woman a young noblewoman of fine breeding who was very beautiful and very well educated. And towards the end of her youth, she found herself married to a crude lower-class man who was a wool draper. Now this man, however, was very wealthy, but all he knew how to do was separate wool from cotton and how to set up a loom to make wool drapes. Obviously a bad match. So the woman vowed that for as long as she was married to this man, she was never going to have an intimate relationship with him. She was determined to seek her pleasure elsewhere, in the company of men who were more worthy of her affection. And so it was that she fell in love with a young, extremely eligible young man in his middle 30s. And whenever a day went by when she couldn't lay her eyes on him, she would be restless for the entire night. This man, however, didn't take notice of the woman. And the woman, being very cautious, would not declare her love to him through a letter or by dispatching a servant to tell him. But she did notice, however, that this man was close friends with a certain priest. After some thought, she came up with an idea. She would use the priest as a go-between to the man she liked. So she went to the church where the priest was and asked him if she could do a confession with him. And he, of course, obliged. Now, towards the end of the confession, she continued by saying, "Father, having already told you my name, you know my family and my husband. And he loves me dearly, more than life itself. And since he's rich, he never hesitates to buy me everything I ever want. Therefore, my love for him is unbounded. If I were ever to do anything that would betray his honor and trust, I would deserve to burn in hell. Now, there is a certain person who is outwardly respectable, who, if I'm not mistaken, is a close friend of yours. I don't know his name, but he's tall and handsome, and he appears to have set his sights on me. He shows up whenever I look out my window or step out the front door or leave my house. In fact, I'm surprised he's not here right now. I'm very upset at this because this kind of behavior gives an honest woman a bad name, even if she's innocent. So, Father, I beg you to tell your friend to stop this. There are plenty of other women who would find this kind of behavior amusing, but I want nothing to do with this." And towards the end of the confession, she bowed her head down and started crying. The father knew immediately who she was talking about and promised her that he would take all the necessary steps to stop this man from bothering her. She felt okay with that and she left. Shortly afterward, the man in question arrived at the church to pay one of his regular visits to the priest. And after some friendly chatter, the priest pulled him aside and reprimanded him. The man was amazed because he had never even looked at the woman, let alone visited her house. But he saw through the cleverness of the scheme. He had to find out what this woman was up to. But then again, he couldn't be sure if it was the woman who had planned this in the first place. After leaving the church, the man made his way to the woman's house for the first time. And proceeding with great caution, he became a regular visitor to the neighborhood from that day on. The lady grabbed this man's attention with something shocking that left a deep impression, where the source of the information wasn't immediately clear. It wasn't immediately clear, thereby weaving this mystery, this real-life mystery that was like a game to him. And he couldn't help but find what's going on. His imagination was filling his mind with possibilities, and even fantasies. And he just had to find the truth. Whether subtle or blatant, there is no known defense to insinuation. How can you defend against something if you can't even see what's happening? That's why insinuation is the supreme means of influencing people. All of us in this room are targets of insinuation every single day, and we're all completely unaware of it. Politicians, they insinuate on a large scale to get us to buy into their agendas and their ideas. Advertising companies, they use sex and sexy models to get us to buy their products. And it works. In fact, some of the thoughts and concerns that you've been having recently might have been insinuated into your head by somebody around you. It's time to wake up and see what's really going on. Open your eyes to the insinuations that happen to you every day, and instead of being the target, maybe you can be the insinuator. Mr. Toastmaster.